everyone, welcome back to my channel. So, okay, I'm just gonna get back into wrap-ups. I actually filmed like a huge collective wrap-up over like the entire amount of time that I missed, and I managed to like squeeze it into like probably under half an hour, but it was just kind of like rushed and chaotic. So I think what I'm actually gonna do, I'm gonna list all of the books that pretty much you guys missed me talking about that I have read in that huge gap that I took from filming. I think I'm going to list them down in the description below, and if you have any that you really want to hear my thoughts about, leave it in the comments and I will include it in like my next wrap up. I know that'll kind of be very odd, but in case you guys want to hear thoughts, I will do that. So I will have a like tremendous list down in the description down below of everything that I read from my break up until July. So this is just going to be the month of July, which was an excellent reading month for me. For being on such like a big break and slump from reading, July like caught me right back up, because in my Goodreads challenge thing, it just kept being like, you're 15 books behind schedule, you're 20 books behind schedule. I am like officially almost caught back up to where I should be, pretty much thanks to the month of July. So in the month of July, I read 16 books. I know, that's a lot. And also what is going to condense this video a lot is the fact that 2 readathons happened, so I will leave the link to the vlog and wrap up of those down below. But these are the 5 books that I read in that week of the readathon craziness. So if you are curious about hearing my thoughts on any of these 5 books, I will leave that linked down below so that I can save time not discussing these in this video. So going all the way back to the very beginning of July, I started out the month reading John Dies at the End by David Wong. This is a book that has been on my shelf for ages, like probably since it actually got released, which was a very long time ago. This book, in case you guys didn't know, was one of the very first books that got released chapter by chapter in like installments, completely online. And it had a huge fan base and following, and it still does. And I've just always wanted to read it, and my boyfriend read this, and this is one of his favorite books like of all time, and he's not a reader, so that was kind of enough of a push for me to finally read it. And I read it, and I'm gonna be honest, I was pretty let down by it. I know I'm gonna offend people because this has such a huge cult following, but I just really didn't click with this book. It just kind of kept going, and I understand the writing style in this, I really do, but I've read a lot of like comedy gore before, where like it's just kind of like weird and eclectic and gory and horror driven, and I feel like I've read a lot of those where this one didn't really stand out to me. It just kind of kept going with its ridiculousness. I'll probably continue on to at least the second one, and I believe the third one is actually coming out this year, just for Randy's sake, because he just adores the series so much. So I gave this 2 stars. Don't hate me. The next book that I read was Words in Deep Blue by Kath Crowley. Look at the cover, it just looks like the perfect YA contemporary, and it was. I gave this 4 stars. It just had a really good meaning to it, but also this book is set in Australia, and it just is following kind of a whole cast of characters as they are like graduating high school and starting adult life. They're in that phase, and one of the main characters, his family owns and operates a very local used thrift bookstore, and the entire story is pretty much centered around books and life experiences and how people connect and share through the bookstore. The bookstore has an entire section in it where people write notes to each other, either anonymously or with full acknowledgement that people are going to know who they are, and the person receiving this letter is going to know who they are. But they leave letters and notes and just kind of little thoughts in all of the books in this one section, and I just love that concept. I gave this book 4 stars. Any book that can name drop a whole bunch of authors and books is gonna like win by me, so I just really liked this book. The next book that I read is The 1000th Floor by Katherine McGee. This one came out last year, and the sequel, I believe, is coming out this month, or just came out. Very soon is a sequel coming out to this. This is about people. This is essentially like Gossip Girl set in the future, where there are literally skyscrapers with 1,000 floors in it, and the higher up you ascend in the tower, the richer you get. So we are obviously going to be following the girl who lives in the penthouse, who was pretty much genetically designed to be the perfect, most beautiful girl ever. It's pretty much following her along with a bunch of other people who kind of come into her life or are her best friends throughout life. And it's just very Gossip Girly. Like, it's a lot of rich people drama, which sometimes you just need that. I personally didn't connect with the characters too much in this, obviously because I am not rich, nor do I live 1,000 floors above ground level. But there were a lot of interesting twists in this, which I really appreciated. There was some LGBT plus stuff in this, which I liked. I gave this 3 stars. I will probably read the sequel just because the characters are still very fresh in my mind. Did I think it was like standout amazing? Not so much. The next book that I read was Nerd Alert, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Because, hello, science. It's amazing. This was just a really fun, really nerdy, I know, book that I listened to actually, and it was read by Neil, which is great because science is amazing. But this is literally what the title says. It kind of breaks down a lot of concepts and theories within physics or within astrophysics in layman's terms, and it was just great. It was a very short book to listen to, and I like learning about stuff like that, and it was just very easy to understand and acknowledge everything that's going on in the universe. It was very cool. I highly recommend this if you're a fan of like the whole Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, science love. I gave it 4 stars. I adored it. The next book that I finally finished was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I say finished because I started this a very long time ago. I was listening to it through Overdrive and I didn't finish it and it got returned to the library, but there was a huge hold list, so it took a long time to get back around to me, but I finally got to finish the second half of this, and Laini Taylor's writing, how do I describe that? It's just so unique and brilliant. Really like her writing, and I really like her storytelling technique. It's just very different from what we're seeing in regular YA, and actually just regular literature in general. Her writing is just very, very stylistic, and it's just so good. I don't even know how to describe this story. We're following Laszlo Strange on this journey to this imaginary world that turns out isn't so imaginary, and it's just I don't know how to describe this book. This is one of those books you just kind of need to experience and appreciate. I gave it 4 stars. I can't wait for the sequel. I didn't know that it was going to get a sequel. I thought this was a standalone. Oh man, was that a shock. But very excited. Really enjoyed it. Alrighty, we are getting into like the best books of this month. I read some really good books, but like these are the good ones. The next book that I read was Roar by Cora Carmack. I know this has mixed reviews. I know some people love it. Some people thought it was kind of like eh. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. This book was so good. This is exactly what I needed to like tide me over in between Sarah J Maas books, and I'm hoping it's going to continue on this pattern because she releases in the spring and the fall. This came out in June. So maybe that'll just kind of continue. This book is great. This is pretty much following a girl in a fantasy world where storms kind of, I don't want to say they rule the world, but they do. There's obviously human politics and governments and lands and kingdoms and whatnot. These huge, really deadly storms kind of sweep across the land in different seasons and in different waves, and they have kind of magical abilities, and in this world there are people who have the ability to reach into the storm and rip out its heart, and they kind of maintain the like essence of the storm once they have the actual heart of it, but that is pretty much the only way that they can defend their cities from these storms is by storm hunters or stormlings who can like defeat these storms before they wipe out your entire nation. It's just, that's the basic concept of the world, and then we are getting into like individual characters, and it's just so good. If you like Sarah J Maas's writing, this is very, very similar. It's not as good, but it's good enough. It's good. I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read is, I don't know, it's a toss-up between Roar and this one. This is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. Let me tell you about this book. I read this book in one sitting, and it's a pretty long book, but it was so good. Like, I can't even express how much love I have for this book. This is like the epitome of like nerd love. It's just so good. It follows a girl who is the author of like the biggest worldwide online comic series and her everyday life, basically, between living with this like super fame and fandom following and being a socially awkward high school student. And when one day a guy transfers to her school who is the biggest fan fiction writer of her webcomic, he moves into her school and it's just the cutest relationship ever. I just love this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. I immediately flipped it over and started rereading it before I realized how insane I was. But I just love this so much. I love it so much, guys. The next book I read was When Dimple Met Rishi, and this is kind of making its rounds on BookTube right now and just in the YA world in general. This is kind of what diversity in YA needs and should be. I really appreciated the Indian culture that got introduced to this, but this is also just kind of a very stereotypical YA contemporary about a girl who is kind of like trying to break the chains of her family's very traditional lifestyle, where she does not want an arranged marriage. She wants to go and write code and be a programmer and kind of live her own life on her own without being married off to somebody that she doesn't really like. So she gets accepted to a program, and at this program there's a boy there who also went to go because little did she know their parents planned on setting them up anyway. And so their relationship is kind of rocky through the whole story, but that's kind of the overall premise of it. And I really, really appreciated the cultural influence that this story had, and that's kind of where it stopped for me. And I know that this is going to be a little bit controversial, but I loved the cultural aspects of this. I liked learning a lot about that culture because I don't know much about it. But as far as the plot goes, I feel like it kind of fell a little flat. There was nothing really unique or stand out about it as far as contemporaries go. It was a very standard contemporary teenage romance in my mind, just with some diversity thrown in, which is good and appreciated, but it didn't blow me away, nor will their story really stand out in my mind. So for that reason, I gave it 3 stars. I highly recommend reading it just for the diversity aspect, but as a story, it was okay. The next book that I listened to was Food, A Love Story by Jim Gaffigan, because I love me some comedian books, especially the audiobooks that are read by them, because it's just great to read it. And Jim Gaffigan is just flawlessly entertaining as far as his food jokes go, and this was just hilarious. It literally was just a book about food and his opinions on certain types of food. So I gave it 3 stars. It's nothing spectacular, it's nothing that is going to change your life, but you will laugh for a solid like 6 hours. So I read that. The next book I read is Queens of Geek by Jen Wilde. Again, with the nerdy perfectness. I loved this. If you're looking for LGBTQ plus love stories, this is definitely it for you. But this is about 3 friends who go to, it's essentially Comic-Con, but it's like not Comic-Con in this, but it's the biggest nerd convention that you can go to, and they're going with their one friend who is a YouTuber and famous on YouTube. So I loved that I could relate to that aspect of just the concept of filming and collabing with people and just YouTube in general. But it also dealt with a girl who is kind of on the spectrum and has a lot of anxiety issues and just her dealing with it, and it changed perspectives between the 3 friends. There's some love interests in this, and it was just so cute. This is such a great one-sitting read that is so nerdy and great. I just loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Just thumbs up, Queens of Geek. And the last book that I want to talk about, I read slightly after all of the readathons because I was going to include it, but it was like the day after they ended, so I'm going to include it in this wrap-up anyway. But I read Paper Princess by Aaron Watt. A lot of you are probably going to hate me about this, but I'm sorry, this book is like trash. I don't understand the hype that this is getting because I was like appalled at how bad it was. And I take this very seriously. Like, I'm not saying this lightly. It just kind of was appalling to me that this is considered YA NA, kind of. Like, it reads like an NA book, but she is 17 and still in high school in this story, and it is just so lewd and vulgar, which I am all for. I am totally for sexy time books that are extremely graphic. Don't get me wrong, I've read my fair share of erotica. This was just so disturbing to me on so many levels, just based on the relationships and how people treated each other. And I know this is supposed to be like a rags to riches story, but it was just so bad. Like, it was kind of a direct ripoff of Beautiful Disaster, which in itself had its own flaws, but I appreciated it, and I feel like it had a legitimate story. But this was just... I might make a whole separate video about this. Let me know your opinions on this series, because I'm gonna continue reading it. I will, just to like kind of see where it goes. But as far as writing and the story goes, it was just a huge thumbs down for me, just all the way. So, on that pleasant note, that was the last book that I read in this wrap-up series. I hope you guys read some amazing books. Again, go check out the list of books down below if you want to hear my thoughts about any of those. Also, the wrap-up for the readathon books will also be down there if you're curious about more thoughts on books that I read this month. So it was a pretty great reading month for me, if I do say so myself. So I hope you guys are reading some amazing books, and I will see you in my next video.